Greetings, people of the interwebs, Jake here. So I was originally planning on reviewing the first 3 episodes of Rings of Power the day that they aired, but it's been a busy few days for me, and also, just this show, trying to motivate myself to go through it. So, before I begin, I have myself a drink. Or two to get through this. So anyways, let's start off. So I actually decided to take notes, just because I thought it'd be a better way to kind of get my thoughts out there on the episode one by one. This entire video will be me reviewing all 3 episodes. So I kind of wanted to do more sort of a play-by-play compared to my normal rambly type videos. But anywho, let's begin. So episode 1 of season 2 opens with the dawn of the Second Age, and we see Sauron, played by a completely different actor. Seems very unnecessary to me, but digressing. So we see Sauron giving a speech to the orcs, with Adar by his side, and, Sauron giving his spiel on why he should be leading the orcs. So, one of the things that he says that I thought was just one of the worst lines of dialogue, just because of how lazy it is, and it's something that occurs a lot in typically lower quality written stuff. But anyways, the example, is so Sauron kind of starts off as as you all know, Morgoth is dead. Now, I understand why they wanted to bring up Morgoth being dead at the beginning of the Second Age, because Morgoth was the first Dark Lord, Sauron's boss basically, and he was the one who created the orcs. And for the viewers who aren't as well educated or as familiar with Tolkien's work, they may not know of who Morgoth was or anything like that. Because, even in The Lord of the Rings, Morgoth was only mentioned once, and that was in the Fellowship once they arrive in Lothlorien, and Legolas mentions that, Gandalf fell to a Balrog of Morgoth. But that didn't really give a whole lot of context as to who Morgoth was or why that was significant in the movies, unless you read the books and, all that stuff. So, I understand that. However, there are better ways of writing that kind of exposition than, as you know, because again, Sauron is talking to the orcs. Every orc should know who Morgoth is, or was at this point, just because Morgoth is the one who created orcs. So even orcs in the Third Age, what we see in The Hobbit and in Lord of the Rings, they would probably know who Morgoth was. They would know that name, because again, he's the one who created them, or brought them into being. Created is maybe not the best. That's a whole other thing. The origins of orcs. But anyways, so I just thought that was really lazy, and also Sauron doesn't have to make a case. Sauron is a Maiar, so basically an angelic being. He rules out of fear. And that's basically how he took over the orcs, and, several different kinds of men, in the south and in the east, is through fear, and also deception, but mostly the orcs, because the orcs are a little bit more. That's kind of how, again, they were created to be subservient to Morgoth and then later Sauron. And so Sauron having to make a case for why he should lead him, I thought was really dumb. And so then they pull a Ides of March type deal where all the orcs just stab Sauron repeatedly, much like Julius Caesar was with his fellow senators and friends and colleagues. And then he kind of dies, which that's a whole other thing too, is, again, being a Maiar, Sauron can't actually die. His body can be destroyed, or his physical body, rather, can be destroyed, but he can just re-embody himself, and obviously his spirit continues on, even without the One Ring. At this point, again, much like Gandalf when he was re-embodied in the Third Age after he died fighting the Balrog, any other Maiar, they cannot die. They can just have their physical bodies destroyed, and then their spirits go back to Valinor, or depending on their power level. So that's a whole other thing. But basically, Sauron can just re-embody himself. So that's. I feel like Adar and some of the other orcs probably would have had some kind of understanding of that, maybe. But also, they should have also been too terrified to even attempt that on Sauron. But anyways, this show doesn't care about the lore or anything like that, as I'll go into so much more throughout these 3 episodes. But then when Sauron's physical body basically dies, he shoots ice breath out of his mouth and basically covers Forodwaith into ice, which I always was under the impression that Forodwaith was an icy wasteland from the beginning, just because, one, it's pretty far north, and two, never confirmed, but my impression was that Forodwaith was relatively close to Morgoth's base, Atuna, which was in the far north and was basically a frozen wasteland. But I guess, it was Sauron. When he died, he could shoot ice breath and turned it into a frozen wasteland. So sure, that tracks. Why not? Instead of ice breath, we see Sauron, his blood poured down into a pit, I guess, somewhere in the mountains, and then it all kind of congeals and it becomes goo. And then he eats a rat, and then the goo just kind of flops around for a while until he eventually takes form into Halbrand. So one of my biggest problems with this is, so even though, again, as I mentioned, Sauron can re-embody himself, and Tolkien never stated how one goes about re-embodying themselves. Second, the writers a lot of creative freedom to showcase that. But of all the ways you could have shown Sauron re-embodying himself, why a pile of goo? And it blows my mind even further that, one, so, during the writing process, someone probably had to pitch that idea of well, hey, what if we show Sauron as a pile of goo? So then they had to okay that. And then after okaying that, it went through various forms of, animations. I'm sure someone sketched it out, and then, as animation does, and eventually it got to the point to where it just people were totally okay with this pile of goo flopping around at, Sauron, until eventually they saw the final product, and they were like, yes, I want a venom-like symbiote Sauron flopping around, and this scene takes up so much time. It's probably a good 10-15 minutes of this, and really the only thing that this scene does is explain the beef between Sauron and Adar, which the whole Adar thing is completely unnecessary. We don't need this whole subplot of an antagonist is unnecessary when we have Sauron, the primary antagonist of the Second and Third Age. But whatever. And the only other thing that it addresses is how Sauron got on that raft in Season 1. But throughout all this explaining, I guess, it just adds so many more questions than actually answers. Much like this entire show from Season 1, and again, at the very beginning of this season, they're just adding so much more, and they're also just really padding the runtime with all this unnecessary stuff. Okay, so, after Sauron Goo, let's move on to, once he becomes what we know as Halbrand, he comes across some refugees fleeing from somewhere, and they mentioned that they're going west, to cross the sea. So the big problem with this is, so if they're going west, and I could be wrong, they may not have specifically said west, but I'm pretty sure they did. But if they are sailing west, that only gives them 2 options where they could go. 1, Valinor. So that's the realm of the gods and the Maiar. So, not happening. Humans are not allowed to sail to Valinor, so no, they couldn't sail to west to Valinor. 2, they could sail to Numenor, because that is also west. It's a bit more southwest, but west. However, and granted, they've been playing pretty loose with the timeline. There really is no timeline. It's simultaneously the beginning of the Second Age and also the end. But the point that they've established Numenor is the Numenorians are they're very prideful, they're very arrogant, and they don't like anyone who isn't Numenorian. So obviously, the Numenorians would not permit these lesser men, or middlemen, as they're usually referred to as, anyone who wasn't of Numenorian heritage or from Numenor directly were usually referred to as middlemen. Like the Rohirrim, the Dunlendings, the Men of Dale, etc. So there's no way that the Numenorians would permit these humans from wherever they're from to dock and immigrate and live in Numenor. So again, it's another one of those things where okay, yes, this explains why Sauron was on that raft, but it also just adds so many more problems that like answers or solves. But anyways, after that, we go to Galadriel being interrogated, as she should be, very rightfully so, after she was palling around with Halbrand, aka Sauron, the entire time, and everyone else, once they realized that she was hanging around with Sauron, they're not too thrilled about that, and so yeah, they let her have it, as they should, and I feel like they weren't hard enough on Galadriel. But anywho, so interrogation scene, turns out she was hanging out with Sauron and decided not to tell anyone because I guess she would feel embarrassed. And sure, yeah, that is really embarrassing. The one person that you're going after the entire first season, you're trying to kill, you're trying to hunt down, you are with him almost the entire time. It does make you look really dumb, but Galadriel is very, very dumb in this show, so it tracks. So anyways, after that, so one thing that I thought was really weird is the elves switching from common or Western to Elvish. So I was always under the impression that anytime that the elves were together, or dwarves or whatever, or even like in real life movies when we see people from different countries speaking in English, like I always understood as like they were speaking in their native tongue. So in this scene, when we start off with the interrogation, even though we are hearing them speaking in English, I was always under the impression that they were talking Elvish, because elves are with other elves. Why would they be speaking anything other than Elvish? So then they, for whatever reason, decided to switch over to switch from Western to, which Western is basically, the common tongue. What we would see is here is English in the Lord of the Rings movies or the books and stuff like that. Admittedly, yeah, that's a bit more of a nitpick than some of the other many problems with this show. But I just thought that was weird, and again, also kind of unnecessary. But anyways, moving on. So then Galadriel, which another thing too with Galadriel is her argument with when they're just laying into her about hanging around with Sauron, she mentions that she was deceived, which she should not have been deceived in the first place, because in the actual lore, her, Gil-galad, Elrond, they even though they didn't know Anatar was Sauron, they definitely thought he was suspicious and didn't permit him into Eregion whatsoever. So it further makes Galadriel seem like an idiot. She should be one of the most wisest and powerful beings in Middle-earth at this point. But instead, they continuously make her act like a petulant child and an idiot. So that was really dumb. It's complete bullshit that Galadriel would have been deceived in the first place if we're going by the actual lore. But again, this show doesn't care about the lore. They don't care about Tolkien. All they want to do is tell their own fanfic. But moving on. So next scene, we see the argument over the Elvish rings, which is also really dumb because the Elvish rings... So... And I don't understand why they did this, because the Elvish rings in the actual lore, they were forged last. And they were separate. That's probably one of the only things that they have in common with this show and the actual lore, is the 3 Elvish rings were forged separately from Sauron. They were using Sauron's lore and knowledge of ringcraft, but they were forged separately. However, again, in the books, they were forged last, after the 9 rings for men, 7 rings for dwarves. And there were probably some other lesser rings created too that just they're never became significant. But for whatever reason, they decided to make the Elvish rings first in this show. I don't understand why. But there's a whole debate on whether they should destroy them, whether they should use them, and it's kind of a moot point because they're independent of Sauron, so they're not a corrupting force. He had nothing to do with them other than they used his knowledge to craft these rings. So really dumb, complete waste of time, much like pretty much everything in this show. But moving on. So after the argument over the rings, Elrond takes them, and his first decision, or instinct decision, is to just leap off a waterfall, and that's his best solution to get out of that situation. And I felt like a better writer could have easily had them resolve this diplomatically, using their words, but the writers in Rings of Power and the showrunners are very lazy. They don't really want to put in the work to tell a good story. So any kind of convenience they can come up with, they just do that. So Elrond just hops off a cliff, jumps down the waterfall, and yeah, that's how he solves that problem. Then after that, we go back to Sauron, and Sauron is captured. He's in Mordor, and it to me it seemed very clear that he was definitely going to try to deceive Adar and try to come up with some kind of plan. But doesn't work out very well. He gets captured. So then after that, we jump to the Harfoots and Discount Gandalf, where Gandalf blows up a tree. And another thing that's so dumb about all of this, especially the Gandalf thing, because again, one, he shouldn't be there. Two, the whole point of the wizards, the Istari, is even though they're incredibly powerful, because they, much like Sauron, are Maiar, so they're angelic, basically the equivalent of they're these angelic beings and incredibly powerful. But they're not supposed to flaunt their power. They're supposed to use their influence to subtly help the free people of Middle-earth combat Sauron. That was the whole point. So him flying through a meteor kind of defeats the purpose of being discreet and subtle. Also, him just using his magic all willy-nilly also kind of defeats the purpose of being subtle. Granted, I know he is an amnesiac, but again, why would you, send one of your servants through a meteor, which is very obvious, like, it was obvious in the show. They made it clear that all the main characters saw that meteor. So, why would you send your servant through a meteor when they, should have arrived by boats? But why would you do that? And then he has no memory of anything. So, one of your best servants, they don't know who they are, what's going on, anything like that. So, the whole Harfoot storyline is so unnecessary. It was so unnecessary in the first season, and they're continuing to make it unnecessary in the second season, but they're doing it anyways. But yeah, that's one of the biggest problems with that scene where he blows up that tree is this man, regardless of whether he's an amnesiac or not, should not be using his powers for little things like that. Like, oh yeah, I'll help us get food, or I'll help us get water, or stuff like that. No, that's not how the wizards work. But again, the writers of the show, the showrunners, they don't care about Tolkien. They just want to do their own stupid fanfic. But anyways, moving on. So after Discount Gandalf blows up the tree, now, here's one thing I will give them credit for. So maybe the person who wrote this scene actually knew what they were talking about. So Nori's asking about Discount Gandalf about home, and he does say he vaguely remembers his home. So that actually is accurate, because when the wizards were sent to Middle-earth, they had a lot of their knowledge and a lot of their experiences. However, their memories of Valinor was kind of left vague. It was like this fleeting memory where they could kind of just, at the tip of their tongue, remember stuff from Valinor. Actually, when Gandalf was re-embodied as Gandalf the White in the Two Towers, he has a little bit more knowledge, a little bit more power from, Eru Luvatar basically being like, all right, you're following your mission, so I'm going to give you a level up. But even still, he didn't have his full memories of Valinor either. But again, I still appreciate the fact that, someone got something right. So, not a bad little scene. Still could have been, written better, or just not been there at all, because, again, this contradicts everything in the lore, but I'll give credit where it's due. That's not a bad scene, because it actually is lore accurate. So, good job to the person who wrote that scene. So next we go back to Elrond. He's on the run, and he meets Círdan. So, I'll give credit again. So I really like the actor they have playing Círdan. I don't recall the actor's name, but he really looks the part, and I like the way that they wrote Círdan so far in this episode, or at this point. And so Círdan, for those of you who don't know, Círdan's the oldest elf in all of Middle-earth. And again, he is the wisest, because he's been around. He's even older than Galadriel, which Galadriel at this point is still, I think she's 6,000 years old, give or take, at this point, even in the Second Age. Círdan's even older. He's so old, he's got a beard. He's the only elf with a beard, which he then later shaves, which was dumb. But digressing. So I do like the way that Círdan's portrayed, where Elrond's kind of explaining his situation, and Círdan just kind of nods like, "Yeah, no," because he's got foresight. And not only does he have foresight, but his foresight is kind of more, I guess for lack of a better word, more powerful than like Elrond and some of the other elves. So that's why when Elrond is telling him the whole situation, again, he basically just nodding. It's like, "Yeah, no, I know what's going on. You don't have to tell me." So again, like the actor, I like how he's portrayed so far. So good job. I'll give credit where it's due once again. So after that, we go to the discussion about destroying the rings, which is complete bullshit because, again, the rings are not a corrupting force. They were forged separately from Sauron. I feel like they're just doing this for the sake of, like, dramatic tension, which I don't understand because, one, the show can't really... They don't know how to do tension. They don't know how to do character development, pacing. They don't really know how to do anything. But I feel like the only reason they're doing this is for the sake of, like, dramatic tension, which obviously it's not. And again, it contradicts the lore, because the three elvish rings are... The whole point of them was to help the elves flourish, help delay them from fading, which I also don't understand that they're... In this show, it seems like the elves, they're fading tomorrow. But in reality, even though the elves, yes, they are fading, but realistically, there are elves still around in the Fourth Age. So after the defeat of Sauron, and when magic was starting to wane, there were still elves. Not as many. Most of them did sail west of Valinor, but there still were elves present throughout Middle-earth. And again, I'd say maybe by like towards the end of the Fourth Age, Fifth Age, by pure speculation on my part, that's maybe when the elves would have really, like, faded, like, proper, like, kind of been non-existent. But this show really wants to make the elves seem like their fading is just the next day. So dumb, unnecessary, dumb, just so dumb. So moving on, after the discussion of the rings, Elrond calls out Galadriel on her shit, as he should, as anyone should, because she's acting like a petulant child, has been since day one of this show. And good on him. Good job, Elrond. So after that scene, we flip back to the Harfoots, and wouldn't you know it, they're lost, and Poppy just happens to show up with a map of Rhûn. What the Harfoots are doing with the map of Rhûn, who knows? But again, this show likes to do that. They don't like to actually take the time to explain things. They just want to be like, "Oh, we've run into a bit of a problem. Well, we'll just have someone conveniently show up who just happens to know things, and boom, there you go, problem solved." So that's exactly what happens. Poppy shows up with the map of Rhûn, and they're on their way. After that, we go back to Mordor. Sauron's clearly trying to deceive Adar, in a very... which, that tracks with this character, but they're just going about it in a very lazy way, where he's basically just like, "Hey, trust me, bro, I know about Sauron, I know where he's at, I can get rid of those pesky elves." And Adar's just going, "Okay." I mean, he's initially like a little hesitant at first, but yeah, he's just like, "Yeah, okay, you seem like a trustworthy guy." Now again, credit where it's due, Sauron is known as the Great Deceiver, but you could have, I just feel, if there were better writers, they could have written that a lot better. But instead, we have what we have, and it ultimately came down to the equivalent of, "Hey, trust me, bro, K." And Sauron makes his way out of Mordor and heads to Eregion. So after that, we get to Gil-galad gives up on like life and everything through a song, before Círdan shows up with the three rings, which that was another thing too that I thought was really dumb. Is so Círdan mentions that like there's a place where he could potentially destroy the rings. It sounded like it was pretty far out at sea. Turns out it looked pretty close, like where he sailed out. I don't know, maybe like. I mean, he was clearly within like eye shot of land, so he didn't go that far before all of a sudden he had a change of heart, which was really dumb. But anyways, so Gil-galad, who's supposed to be one of the greatest High Kings of the Noldor, is not in this show. He's the worst, the absolute worst. He's like the manager that everyone hates at your job, and everyone just kind of like tolerates. But yeah, that's basically Gil-galad. No one seems to like him, but he's the king, so they're just kind of like, whatever, I guess we'll tolerate him. I hate his guts. But yeah, so he's singing a song. He's basically given up until Círdan shows up. It's like, "Good news, guys. Didn't destroy the rings. We should definitely keep them." To which that's all that anyone needs to hear. Is they're like, cool, all right, yep, we're keeping these rings and we're gonna do our stuff. And then again, they really try to like, I guess, emphasize that like the elvish rings are this corrupting force, which they're not. So again, going against the lore, but this show does not care. So of course it's going to go against the lore and make it seem like the three elvish rings are a corrupting force, like the One Ring. So yeah, a lot of what again I imagine was dramatic tension, but it's not. It's just done. So then after that, the rings, once they put them on, they just instantly cure Linden. The decay just brightens up, full lush trees bloom, and again, that was the point of the rings. It was to preserve, Linden, Lothlorien, and all the Elvish realms, and prevent them from fading. But I feel like, even though they're magic, and you can do a lot with magic, but I still don't think that as soon as they put on the rings in the books, that it was an instantaneous thing. I know that there is nothing in the lore to state otherwise, but that's just me. I just thought that was so, again, very lazy. Even though it was a cool scene to see, like, it was a beautiful scene getting to see, like, the trees and stuff like that. And one thing that I will give this show credit for is most of the visuals are pretty solid. But I just thought that was really dumb. That just literally instantly, as soon as they put on those rings, just bam, everything's cured. So then after that, we get Sauron arrives in Regen overnight because, what's crossing 500-600 miles, maybe even more from Mordor to Regen? You can get there overnight, Middle-earth's got a really good Uber service. So yeah, that's episode 1. Off to a bad start. And, maybe I was too optimistic when I was thinking that, like, all right, they've had 2 years. Surely they learned a little bit from season 1. They kind of took some of the criticisms to heart and will improve season 2. But based on episode 1, oh no. No. They did not. They most certainly learned absolutely nothing and completely ignored any feedback. Now, it's one thing to ignore, like, a lot of the hate, which there's a lot of stuff to hate in this show, but some of the hate towards like the cast and stuff like that was unnecessary because look, they're just actors. They're doing the best with what they got, and unfortunately, they don't have much with this script. So I actually don't fault the actors. I think they've actually done pretty well given what shitty material they have to work with. But you could still take the constructive criticism of like, hey, here's what didn't work for me. Here's how you should improve. But they didn't do that. They doubled down. But anywho, moving on to episode 2. So episode 2 opens with Khazad-dûm, which looks really cool. And again, I'll give credit where it's due. I love the visual aesthetic of Khazad-dûm in its prime. That was one thing that I loved about season 1. Is again the looks of Khazad-dûm. I love the music, not just for Khazad-dûm, but just the score in general that Bear McCreary does for this show, both season 1 and season 2 so far. Solid. Have no complaints there with the score. Not quite as good as Howard Shore, but that's just hard to top. So I'm not gonna, that's fine. So yeah, opens with Khazad-dûm, looks great. Then we jump to Disa, who seems to have spider senses for some reason, and is able to, detect that, like, there's an earthquake or a rumbling or whatever, and boulders just gonna start crashing down. So, yeah, sure, why not? She's got spider senses. So after that, we go to Galadriel's prophetic dream, and I kind of figured just from the trailer when they first showed, like, snippets of this scene that it'd be, like, a dream where, like, the vines are all, like, slithering like snakes. So we see Celebrimbor get tied to the tree and get pierced through the chest, which, again, very prophetic because in the actual lore, when Celebrimbor dies, he's pierced by many arrows, and then his dead body is used as like a banner when Sauron marches on the elves. So, yeah, okay, kind of cool, I guess. Set after a perfected dream. Another thing that I don't understand is so her biggest defense is. Or no, sorry. So she states at like the War Council a very obvious plan of Sauron. It's like Sauron's evil. He's going to do evil stuff. Like these rings, but he's going to use those for manipulation and deceiving and evil stuff. And he's going to take over the world. And I guess Gil-galad's just kind of like, yeah, interesting. I never would have thought that. So good on you, Galadriel. I'll send you abroad to go thwart evil and go to Celebrimbor. Which also I don't understand. So when in episode 1, when Galadriel tells it it's Sauron's the whole time. They haven't heard from Celebrimbor. Gil-galad says, "Oh, just send a messenger." No. What are you talking about? The greatest evil of Middle Earth could potentially be in Eregion with Celebrimbor right now, or heading that way. And you're just going to send a messenger? No, dispatch like an army. Like, if not the full armies of Lindon, at least, a few hundred people. Or Gil-galad could go himself, send Elrond, send someone of note, but instead he's like, just send a messenger. So dumb. But, again, that tracks with the show where everyone's just dumb. And they just, for the sake of the story, this terrible story and plot, they're dumb. Yeah, so she states Sauron's very obvious plan, and, she is still determined to track down Sauron. For whatever reason, Gil-galad's just like, yeah, okay, you can go. So the next scene, after that, we go to Rune, and we see Kieran Hines as, I'm assuming, Saruman. Because that's who he looks like. And even though I do really like Kieran Hines as an actor, and I think he looks really good as Saruman, the character, is much like Gandalf, is a good 3,000 years too early. Because again, I'm pretty sure the wizards didn't arrive until the year 1000 of Third Age. But again, this show doesn't care about the lore. They don't care about the canon. They don't care about timelines. They're doing their own thing in this fanfic. So again, looked cool. I think a good choice casting wise for Saruman. Just again, good 3,000 years too early. So after that, so in my notes, I just put Harfoots, because we're back with the Harfoots. The most again, in a show with a lot of unnecessary stuff going on, like subplots and dialogue and just terrible, terrible story, the Harfoots might take the cake for the most unnecessary. Yeah, and then, they got Easterlings chasing them, and then this scene is basically a ripoff of the Blackgate scene in the, Return of the King. Remains Two Towers. When, Return of the King. When Frodo and Sam are about to enter the Black Gates before, Sam falls down that ledge, and Frodo's got to use their elvish cloaks to kind of disguise themselves and look like rocks. Basically the same thing. Complete ripoff. And another thing, too, with this show is they've ripped off multiple times from Peter Jackson's movies. And even though they said that, this is completely independent and they're only using Second Age story, they're using a lot of Third Age stuff. And if you're going to rip off, which it wouldn't even be considering ripping off, if you're actually adapting the source material from the books, but instead they're ripping off scenes from Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy. And they're doing it in a very poor way. And that's also frustrating to me, is they keep trying to rip off the Peter Jackson movies. And again, it's a very poor imitation of it. Moving on. So after that, we get Narvi. So, kind of cool getting to see Narvi. For those of you who don't know, Narvi is, him and Celebrimbor were really good friends in the lore. And they're the ones who basically crafted the doors, the West Gate of Moria. So when the Fellowship first arrive in Moria and they see the, glowing inscriptions, that was Narvi and Celebrimbor. They're the ones who made that door, and they were really good friends. They traded a lot, and, they were fellow craftsmen. So it was cool getting to see Narvi. So after that, we go to Singing to the Mountain, which I have kind of mixed feelings about this, because on a conceptual level, I think it's kind of cool, and it does make sense that the dwarves would have like a deep connection to the earth, because Aule the smith, he forged the dwarves in Tolkien's lore. They weren't supposed to be created like the humans and elves were. And I just think that tracks with dwarves in any work of fiction or even mythology, very close to the earth. So on a conceptual level, I do think that's kind of cool, and I guess like the only reason why I'm kind of mixed is Tolkien never wrote about that. So it's like, yeah, it's maybe not necessarily accurate, but I think thematically it's kind of cool, so I don't mind it. And there was like some of the singing to the mountain in first season. Again, it was fine. I don't hate that. Kind of a cool idea. So I'm a little mixed, but overall, not a terrible idea. But then they're kind of, like, oh, the singing doesn't work, and Disa and Durin start squabbling. And here's one of the few, I guess if I could say highlights of season 1, was anytime they went to the dwarves, Durin and Disa, I really liked those characters. And the dwarvish subplot, even though it was really dumb, the whole thing with Mithril being able to cure the decay in the elves and stuff like that was ridiculous. But overall, I like those characters of Durin and Disa. I like them less so far in this season, and again, this subplot I like it less than in the first season. So like their whole squabbling, could care less. So after their squabble, we next go to Galadriel actually admitting she screwed up, which I found kind of surprising because this whole time throughout season 1 and 2, Galadriel's been very much, again, the petulant child throwing hissy fits and temper tantrums to get her way, but it seems like she's actually growing up and admits that she was wrong. So good on her. Only took her, a whole season and 2 episodes into season 2 to realize that. But hey, maybe finally we'll get some character growth. Probably not. She's probably still going to keep acting like a petulant, annoying child. But at least she actually admitted she was wrong. So then after that, we go to Elrond turns Galadriel down when she's trying to recruit him to go on her mission Gil-galad sent her on to go to Rhuidean. And understandable. Like, why would Elrond want anything to do with her? She's been lying. She lied to him. She's kind of just a terrible person. So yeah, I don't blame him. Then after that, we go to Discount Gandalf finds a staff and a sandstorm. Because I guess in the logic of the writers, what gives wizards their power is staffs. Now, yes, the staffs they kind of have power to them. It's never really explained how much power the staffs lend, or if it's more of just like a way to focus their power. But yeah, I guess to the writers, that's the only way that wizards have power is their staffs. And then he creates that whole sandstorm again, not exactly being subtle, very much drawing attention to himself, but whatever, plot conveniences. Gotta get rid of those pesky Easterlings somehow. So then after that, we go back to Moria. Sorry, not Moria. Iridium. And Celebrimbor shows the Ithilden. So basically, the Ithilden is when you can take Mithril, and Mithril is one of the most versatile metals in Tolkien's world, where you can even weave it into like fabric and stuff like that. But anyways, so he shows Ithilden, which is basically like where you're able to write. So again, the Westgate of Moria that we see in the Fellowship, that's Mithril, where it's able to glow in moonlight. That's Ithilden. So thought that was kind of cool. Nice little, one of the few little side tidbits that I appreciate as a lore junkie. So after that, Sauron shows up, and well, you know what? He deceives old Celebrimbor. So again, in the actual lore, yes, he does deceive Celebrimbor, but I feel like he should have. I don't know. I mean, I'll say this. It makes more sense in context. This scene where we see Halbrand turn into Anatar compared to the trailers, because in the trailers I was under the impression that like he just shows up out of the blue as Anatar, and Celebrimbor does not realize that's the same dude just with a wig and pointy ears. So okay, yeah, that contextualizes things. So maybe I was being a little too critical with my initial trailer reaction. And to be fair to Celebrimbor, he did just see this man basically turn and do all these light tricks and stuff like that. So fair enough. And Celebrimbor again, he was deceived in the lore. Um, I still think they maybe could have done that better though. But anyways, so after Celebrimbor is deceived, Sauron asks for more rings. And again, Celebrimbor's initially hesitant just because the first thing that Sauron proposes is fortune rings for men. But Celebrimbor's just like, well, I just watched you turn into a godlike being, so yeah, okay, I guess we can forge some more rings. Why not? So then after that, actually no. So that happens before Sauron turns into Anatar. So he cosplays as a god basically, and then that's when Celebrimbor's like, yeah, all right, let's go forge those rings, pal. So after Sauron cosplays, we get Galadriel being demoted, which she should have been very, very long ago. And again, it still baffles me that Galadriel, again, supposed to be one of the wisest beings in all of Middle-earth, continues to act like a petulant child. Everyone talks down to her, as they should, but as they should in the context of this show, but they shouldn't in the context of the actual lore, where Galadriel is very wise, and everyone respects her, because, she actually gives good advice and doesn't do stupid shit like she does in the show. So after Galadriel gets demoted, we moved to Eregion, where the dwarves are summoned to Eregion, and Durin and Dis are a little hesitant, but they decide to go anyways, and that's where episode 2 leaves off. So, moving on to episode 3. And I wish I had been drinking at the time watching the show. Maybe would have helped me bear through it a little bit better. But anyways, so episode 3 opens with Isildur's horse, Beric, I think was its name. Again, they're ripping off straight from Lord of the Rings, the Peter Jackson trilogy, where Brego is freed and saves Aragorn, because another thing was so dumb with season 1, where I guess they teased Isildur like possibly dying in like the big pyroclastic flow explosion at the volcano. It's like, we all know Isildur's not dead. He's the one that takes the One Ring from Sauron's dead body after Gil-galad and Elendil defeat him. But Horse, probably one of the best characters so far. Gives no shits, kicks an orc straight into a tree and impales it. Cool beans. So again, get a straight up rip off of the Two Towers scene. And Isildur maybe being in Shelob's lair? Maybe fights Shelob or some of Shelob's spawn? Don't know. But I feel like that was one of those things like, oh, we should totally have Shelob's lair here. Fans will love it. So then after Isildur and Shelob's lair, we go to Tar Palantir's funeral. And shortly afterwards, we see Ar-Pharazôn scheming, and that's very much in line with Ar-Pharazôn, but the dude is scheming in like a very public place, like at basically a bar, where the entire public could just kind of walk and overhear him talking. So not exactly the best for scheming. But again, that just shows the credit of this writing team, where they have people scheming and talking about their plans in a very public forum, rather than like scheming in a very secluded area. But again, I do like the actor that plays Ar-Pharazôn. He looks very much like Ar-Pharazôn has been depicted in a lot of fan art. I think even official art by like John Howe and I can't remember the other artist's name, but a lot of artists who have done like artwork for the Lord of the Rings and stuff like that. So I do like the actor who's playing Ar-Pharazôn. Again, I actually like a lot of the actors. They're just, again, not given very good material. But after that, we go to Palantir gone missing, Earion. Because Earion, the non-existent daughter of Elendil in the actual lore, but for whatever reason they decided to give him a daughter in this show. And she's also not one of the faithful. Again, I assume just for dramatic purposes. Seal's the Palantir because I honestly forgot all about it until this season, and I was like, oh yeah, that's right. She snuck in. I don't know if she snuck into Char Palantir's room, but basically she came across the Palantir and kind of figured out a lot of stuff that you can see stuff when you look into it. That's actually what Palantir translates to. Whole scene. But anyways, so then after that we go back to Numenor. Go from Numenor to Mordor, and we get a troll named Damrod. So, and again, admittedly, this is one of the more nitpicky things, but I don't think Damrod is a good name for a troll, mainly because Damrod is one of the names of Faramir's Rangers in Ithilien in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, in the books. So Damrod is likely a... So, I mean, obviously not a whole lot's known about Damrod, but more than likely, the name Damrod is probably of Numenorean origin or Gondorian origin. So I don't know why they decided to give this troll. Why would a troll have like a Gondorian or Numenorean name? So I don't know. Admittedly, yes, that's very nitpicky, but it just doesn't work for me to have a troll with like a Gondorian / Numenorean name. But moving on. After we get our very dapper named troll, so we go to Celebrimbor, offers his rings to Durin. So he's already forged the rings, offers them to Durin. Durin, understandably so, and why I like this character, is he's very dubious of this. He doesn't really quite... He senses something is off, even though it's weird. This should actually be the elves being dubious of the Sauron, all of the Anatar. Anyways, so yeah, Durin is kind of dubious, senses something is off, but after that we go with Sauron continues to deceive Celebrimbor. Again, yeah, that's fair. Like Anatar, or when Sauron is in the guise of Anatar, he is very much running the show in Eregion, along with Celebrimbor and the Gwaith Myrmidine. So basically, the guild of other craftsmen that Celebrimbor was in charge of in Eregion. And then again, the whole Mithril being like this cure, it's so dumb. Like Mithril is just a metal in the books. It's a very versatile metal, but it's just a metal. That's it. It is, you can do a lot of stuff with it, but it's just a metal. It doesn't have any like healing properties or anything like that. But again, the show, they're lazy writing, and they decided to make it like this object that can do whatever the plot demands it to. So it's like, oh, it needs to cure something. It needs to do this. It needs to do that. Mithril can do it all, apparently. Then after that, we go to... Yeah. So, Antar then goes to Durin and, tries to convince him about the rings, but Durin's not seeing through Sauron's shit. Which, again, is also kind of tracking to, like, the dwarves, because the dwarves are very stubborn. And even when Sauron did give the dwarves the rings, he wasn't able to control them. They just kind of enhanced their lust for riches and stuff like that. So that does make sense, because the dwarves, they are very stubborn, and so yeah, I do like the fact that Durin, again, he senses something's a little off here. Then we have Celebrimbor with stubborn pride, where, Anatar is just kind of like, oh, dude, like, oh, man. If Gil-galad finds out, but, Celebrimbor was like, no, this is my pride and joy, which, again, does track with Celebrimbor, who was very prideful. He was trying to rival his grandfather, Feanor, who is the greatest craftsman. He's the one who forged the Silmarils. And so, again, in this context, it does make a lot of sense that Celebrimbor is very adamant about completing his work with the rings. So there's getting they're getting some elements of accuracy right, but then it's like for every one accurate thing, there's 10 inaccuracies. Um, so then Isildur is apparently a grave robber. Sees some dead bodies in like a pool of water, takes their boots and their sword. I know they're dead, but it's still a little dishonorable. So then he comes across Estrid, a suspicious possible love interest, and yeah, she's suspicious right off the bat. Um, we'll get more into that later, but yeah, comes across this lady out in the middle of nowhere, stabs him, and yeah, he's kind of like, oh, it's okay, you can come with me now. Then after that, Isildur is ambushed. And then that's when Arndir, doing elf stuff, shows up and conveniently rescues him, because, again, this show's just littered with conveniences. And after Arndir shows up and saves the day, we go to Bronwyn's funeral. So, this is another one of the scenes where I'm a little mixed on, because he does mention that, like, orcish arrows, or I should specify, Arndir mentions that orcish arrows, the one that killed Bronwyn was laced with poison, which, that's true. A lot of orcs did use poisons on their arrows. But, at the same time, I don't know why the actress who played Bronwyn didn't return for season 2, so I thought that was just that was their way of conveniently writing her off. It's like, oh, yeah, the arrow she got shot by was poison. Guess the other arrows weren't poison? I don't know. Yeah, so funeral pyre for Bronwyn. Then after that, we go to Durin. Exposition dumps, apologizes to his dad, all that stuff. And again, obviously, you have to have exposition, especially in fantasy, and then especially in Tolkien, where lots going on, lots of detail. But this show is the worst with exposition dumps. So, yeah, the two Durins, which again, Durin the fourth shouldn't be named Durin, because the whole reason they're called Durin is they're believed to be a re-embodied or a reincarnation of Durin the First. It's a whole thing with the dwarves. Another many problems that I have. Yeah, so lots of exposition. Then we jump back to Arndir and Theo. They're angry because Bronwyn's dead, which was Arndir's love interest, Theo's mom. And Theo's just kind of like, "You're not my dad," and just storms off angrily because he's an angsty teen. And Theo, that's really all Theo is. They're like, pretty much every character in this show is very one-dimensional. You can just describe them by like a single characteristic trait. So after that, we go to Isildur shares story with Estrid, and sure enough, she's suspicious because she's got the mark of Adar on the back of her neck. Who could have saw that coming? Yeah, that show's terrible with this. Like, they keep doing things to try and keep us in suspense, but they're terrible at actually writing it because it's obvious from the beginning. Like Halbrand being Sauron, pretty obvious from the beginning. The Stranger being Gandalf, pretty obvious. Estrid being a follower of Adar, pretty obvious. Now, she'll probably have a turn of heart where she becomes good, because, of course. But yeah, it was pretty obvious that she was very much a follower of Sauron / Adar. Then the bandits or whatever getting plucked out of thin air, Ents. Because, of course, Ents. Which, to be fair, in the rough area that they're at, the Entwives had moved east, and actually the Brown Lands, which if you look at a map of Middle-earth, you'll see kind of labeled in between Mordor, the like kind of northern edge of Mordor, and like around the Dead Marshes, there's a open area called the Brown Lands. So that used to be a very like lush, forested area until the Second Age, when Sauron waged war against the elves and men, and burnt it all to the ground. So it's believed, and widely speculated, that like the Entwives were living there at the time, so they're probably all dead. I mean, obviously not this time period, but at that time, before the War of the Ring, during the Second Age, War of the Last Alliance, is when Sauron scorched earth techniques wiped out that area and became this barren area called the Brown Lands. So of course it's Ents. I'll wait to judge and see if this makes more sense. The next the next episode and the rest of the season. But as soon as I saw that dude like chopping a tree randomly at night, I don't know why someone would be chopping a tree at night. But yeah, as soon as I saw that and people started disappearing, I'm like, oh, ends. And that's literally all I wrote in my notes is just ends. So after that, we go to Tarmiriel's speech and Numenorian division. So she gives a speech, and then basically Arpharazon counters her speech. Eagle shows up, and then people are like, oh, the Eagle showed up during his speech, so I guess he's the one to lead us. So the Numenorians are apparently really dumb, because all it takes to motivate them is people being like, oh, they're here to take our jobs, so let's not like elves and anyone who's not us. And an Eagle shows up, and they're like, oh, he's our guy. Yeah. So, Eagles! That's what I put with a exclamation point. Eagles. Which, Eagles are actually very significant to Tolkien's world and the Numenorians. Yeah. So then we finished episode 3 off with the Forging of the Seven Rings. And that's it. So, yeah. Man, obviously, I'm not too thrilled with this show. I really was hoping to like this show. And the trailers were definitely better than the first season trailers. They gave me just a small sliver of hope that, like, maybe, just maybe, this season would be better. But so far, it's pretty much all more the same. Like, bad writing, a lot of plot contrivances, bad dialogue, and a complete disrespect and lack of care for the actual source material, and contradictions. I'm going to continue watching this show, because I'm already invested at this point. A part of me wonders if, like, they released the first 3 episodes in an 8-season series as a way to kind of, like, maybe help fudge the numbers or to try and get it over with faster, because they kind of knew not a lot of people loved season 1, because, like, only 37% of people who started season 1 finished it. So, yeah, this show's not going over well, and I don't foresee season 2 going over well any better. I am curious, though, to see what the kind of end results are for viewership of season 2, because again, if 37% of people who started season 1 only bothered to finish it, how many people who dropped off season 1 are going to return, or maybe even finish season 1 to see if, like, okay, maybe season 2 gets better, or if that 37% is going to drop even lower. Based on reviews from YouTubers that I watch, and just reviews in general, and also just from the lack of chatter that I've seen on social media from friends, family, I feel like Amazon really kind of dropped the ball on this one. But hey, that's what you get for spending like $1 billion on a fanfic. But anyways, that wraps up my review of the first 3 episodes of Rings of Power. What did you think, lovely viewers? Give me your thoughts below in the comment section, and do the usual YouTube-y stuff of liking, commenting, and subscribing, all that jazz. And until next time, everyone, cheers.